On today's World Insight, Beijing loses no time to stop a spike in new coronavirus infections. The new normal? To frontline doctors with their prognosis. China takes a new digital era approach to building infrastructure. The details from a person in the know.
The first period is we'll use all resources necessary to fight against the spread of the virus.
And how's the Chinese economy weathering the pandemic storm? An investment mover and shaker with the facts.
It is a severe blow.
Here is our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei in Beijing. We begin with the coronavirus situation in Beijing, where more coronavirus cases have been reported. This brings the total number of infections to more than 100 over the past 5 days. The capital is carrying out extensive testing for new infections. Its daily testing capacity has reached over 90,000 samples. To curb the spread out of the city, outbound taxi and car-hailing services have all been suspended, and outbound travel is banned for high-risk people. Those who have left Beijing are asked to report to local authorities. Beijing's education authority has ordered some schools to close and are allowing students to opt for stay-at-home classes. For the issue earlier, I talked to Dr. Hua Chengzhu, an associate professor from the State Key Laboratory of Emerging Infectious Diseases of the University of Hong Kong, and Dr. Alex Kim Kam-tan, an internist at Miss Medi Women's Hospital in Seoul. Let's listen into the conversation. So let me begin by asking both of you about your latest reaction to the outbreak here in Beijing.
Okay, so we know that just recently we realized that there's a new outbreak in Beijing. That is kind of surprising because after all, in spite of the very strict disease control throughout the whole China, and also around 2 months completely clear of any local cases in Beijing. All of a sudden, we have these over 100 cases related to the Xinfadi market. That's kind of surprising. But what is not that surprising is that we know that now we live in such a global village, and actually outside China, in many countries, there's still a disease outbreak ongoing. So I think that this kind of emergence of the COVID-19 in Beijing at this specific market actually indicates that there might be some blind spots or some knowledge gap in our understanding of this virus. So that's kind of raising an alarm, and we have to cope with it appropriately.
Dr. Tan from South Korea. Now, doesn't that sound familiar? I mean, we've been hearing, testing, and then now we are back to the story. So, Dr. Tan, your reaction?
Right. So, COVID-19 is showing us just how effectively it spreads and it hides.
Yeah.
So, even if there are days when it looks like there are no new cases, there are, but they're just hidden under our radar. And so that's why we need to have this attitude that COVID-19 is endemic. In Korea, we know it is not going to go away for at least another year. And that's the way that we are approaching it. Few countries where they really do not have COVID-19, but I think for the vast majority of the population on this planet, we need to understand that COVID-19 is not going to go away, and so we do need to have a strategy in place for coping with this disease for the long run. And long run, I mean at least 12 to 16 more months from now.
Tell me more about how you are trying to contain the outbreaks at the second stage already, it seems.
Right, so the characteristic of the outbreaks are a little bit different because now they are centered in the metropolitan Seoul region. So Seoul is our capital city. It is the most populated city in our country. And then the environment of Gyeonggi province and Incheon, they all border on Seoul. And so we're talking about a population of about 20 million people in which we are seeing more and more outbreaks. We are seeing higher percentage of cases that are detected that have no epidemiological link. And that is very concerning indeed, because that indicates that there are people in the community who are spreading COVID-19 that we are not able to identify. And what we've been able to find out from previous outbreaks with the sort of the real-time tracing that's happening is that it spreads from the first source up until the seventh chain or seventh branch of the chain of transmission within 10 to 14 days. Wow. And so it's really a race against time to try to track and trace every single case so that we can get control.
You know, one of the things we have is about the testing. Of course, we know testing is extremely crucial, whether it is in China or in South Korea or anywhere. However, when I was on my way here to work, I saw already people lined up in front of the gate of the testing center. You know, they stand in space so that there will not be any transmission, just in case. But there is a percentage with which the testing will not be able to identify. I mean, the so-called false negative or false positive. And also, there's the issue of how many testing you can do within a day.
Well, we know that there is no 100% specific and sensitive test in the world. And so we're dealing with a test that we know is inherently flawed. However, it tends to be more sensitive. In other words, if anything, people are going to have false positives rather than false negatives. That's the way that PCR tests work. And so I think we have a pretty good idea that we are catching most of the cases that we are testing for. In terms of testing capacity, we have more than 600 screening centers located throughout the country, and our capacity is upwards of 20,000 tests per day that we can run. And if we do need to increase that capacity, we're ready to do that. However, I think what we need now more than ever is a more rapid diagnostic method. Right now, our PCR test takes about 6 hours to run, but it takes 24 hours for us to get the results back.
Yes.
If we have a worst case scenario where we have a huge outbreak in Seoul, say in our subway system or some place where it's a huge amplification event, 20,000 tests per day may not be enough, and waiting for 24 hours may be too long. And so I think we really do need to work on getting a more rapid diagnostic test available.
Yes.
And also, we're doing everything we can to let people know if they have a risk of exposure to get tested. We are using SNS messages and sending out messages on the radio and on the TV. But I think that's another crucial aspect, is just letting the public know who is at risk, who might have been exposed, so that they can have testing. The testing can be done rapidly, and it's done in a targeted fashion.
Another thing that is very important, Dr. Chen and Dr. Zhu, that is, you talk about a scenario in which an outbreak could happen. As you see, the virus is spreading so fast, could happen within just a few days, and everything has to be ready within those few days. So now we are already experiencing outbreaks. So we have to do two things. One is to deal with the outbreak already we are having right now. Meanwhile, planning for even worse scenario, as both of you just mentioned. Can we do both? What does it mean to do both? What should we involve, and who should we involve in to do both? These are structural questions.
Case scenario planning is going on here in Seoul, and since we had our big outbreak in Daegu, we have a little bit of an idea of what we need to do. First of all, we need to have a national and regional network of hospitals so that bed space can be used very efficiently. If there is a critical patient, they should not be limited to one hospital or the hospital closest to where they're located. We need to be able to transport our patients very quickly to the type of acuity bed that they need. The other issue is just having the sheer number of beds available if there is a huge outbreak. Right now, there are maybe 1,000 critical care beds that we might be able to use, but we may need more, and so we are actually trying to procure more beds, considering maybe building an infectious disease hospital that's designated just for infectious diseases. And then we are going to need more isolation centers in the metropolitan region. We had a few dormitories set up near Daegu and the Gyeongsang-Bukdo province, but if we have an outbreak in Seoul that is big, we will need more isolation beds. And so we are working to get facilities ready just in case. It would be great if we didn't need them, but we do need to have the worst case scenario in our minds and prepared, because it feels imminent. The numbers that we're seeing indicate that a bigger outbreak could happen.
Yeah.
We are hoping that everyone is making the infectious disease measures, the prevention measures, habits. We're hoping that there will be a cultural change in our population so that people know that they need to wash their hands at least 10 times a day. Of course, mask wearing needs to happen anytime they're in the public, and then keeping the 2 meters distance. We're hoping that business owners and people who are leaders of organizations are making sure that their indoor spaces are ventilated and disinfected, so that we can make sure every day we are working to break small chains of transmission.
Dr. Zhu, China also is preparing. Today, I've already got the news that some of the hospitals in Beijing are already trying to go to rescue for Jitan Hospital, which is a hospital designated to deal with cases such as COVID-19. And of course, they're both in Beijing, so it's easier, but still the system has to work in that direction. And meanwhile, we all know that Xiaotangshan Hospital, which were used during SARS outbreak 17 years ago, now might be restarted in Beijing once again, just in case a worse scenario happens. Dr. Zhu, tell us more about what needs to be involved here for the worst case scenario. We need to prepare for it.
Beijing is located in the center of China, and it's our capital. So every day it has very busy transportation, business, and lot of population there. So apart from all the preparations in Beijing, but now we also see that some cases in Hebei and also Sichuan also related to this Xinbadi market. So we have to also get the other cities and regions also well prepared and realize that we might have this kind of risk. So I think that first facilities and also reagents, the testing reagents, and also the personnel that is well trained to cope with this kind of events once there's an outbreak. And also I think that after so many months of preparing or getting so alert, lots of people, they are kind of like becoming less and less alert against the COVID-19. But with this kind of flare-up in Beijing, I think that it's time for us to request that people still need to maintain our like good personal hygiene, and also try to keep the necessary physical distancing. Yeah, and all these kind of medical precautions when you handle a person with some possible infections, something like that.
Yeah,
so
you know,
I think
the fatigue issue is really a big one. We see that not only here in China, in South Korea, we see that in the United States, Canada, even New Zealand, which just celebrated the victory. So anywhere, everywhere, how to deal with the fatigue now to make sure that that cultural change is really going to happen. This is probably a most profound question we need to face right now. Dr. Tan.
I think a couple things. First of all, it's getting hot in Korea, it's getting hot in China, all around the world, the temperatures are rising, and so it's getting very hard for people to cover their face or wear masks. So we've developed KFAD masks, which are anti-droplet masks that are a little bit thinner, a little bit more tolerable, so people can wear them every day. In terms of cultural change, I think also we need to be a little bit realistic because people want to have fun. People want to enjoy their lives. They can't be imprisoned in their own lives because of this disease. So we need to get creative and let people have outlets that are safe for having fun, for learning, for interacting. And that's, I think that's a huge challenge because it's something that we've never had to do before. But people are getting creative. They're doing, for example, drive-through dance parties. They're doing, a lot of creative things, singing far away from each other but together. So I think this is part of the realistic aspect. So there's an infectious disease aspect to it, certainly, but then there's the rest of life, right? And we have to find outlets for people to enjoy their lives. Otherwise, they are just going to get tired and they're going to give up. And if the public gives up, then really it's a lost battle. We need to have everyone on board.
Exactly.
And so we need to let people know that they have, there are safe outlets for them to enjoy, and we need to let them know how to do it safely.
Final question for both of you. People talk about a new normal. We do not know when it started, but it's already starting. So what is new normal to you under the impact of COVID-19?
First, our lifestyle and some of the culture, we have probably have to change it or modify it. And then also we have to make ourselves more alert, more well educated with some medical knowledge. And also for the research part, I think nowadays lots of people, they are working very hard on how to develop new jobs, new methodology, new intervention measures. And I think that the policies also encourage people to have some rapid channel or green channel.
Okay, got it. And Dr. Tan, what is new normal to you?
New normal, I think, means having a heightened awareness of infectious disease. So I know some people, when we wake up every day, we're not just looking at the weather report, we're looking at the COVID-19 status report in our country. That's something that we do now regularly. So we know, where are the hot spots, where are the places that perhaps I should avoid. Also, personal hygiene, as was mentioned by Dr. Ju, is, it just has to be part of our everyday habits. And then I think also just having this hybrid, now we're interviewing, by Zoom all the time now. This is the new normal, right? And I think this is also going to be going forward for workplaces, for education, doing things remotely in a non-contact manner, distance learning, doing things more online. I think that just has to be part of reality now going forward. Not just during the pandemic, but perhaps it will extend beyond the pandemic as well. And then also just an awareness of not just COVID-19, but other health threats, such as global warming or antibiotic resistance. I think people now have an awareness that these threats that scientists have been warning about, that they are real, that we really do need to take them seriously and act preemptively to prevent them from happening.
You're watching World Insight. Coming up on our program, China takes a new digital era approach to building new infrastructure. The details from a person in the know right after the break. Welcome back. This is World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. China seeks to jumpstart the economy with the so-called new infrastructure construction, a pump priming effort to get people back to work. Unlike traditional infrastructure such as railways, highways, and airports, it is a new round of digital infrastructure such as data centers. Earlier, I talked to Professor Zhou Hanmian, the Standing Committee member of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, or CPPCC. He's also the Vice Chairman of China National Democratic Construction Association. He said, we were entering the data era, And how is China going to do it? Let's listen in. You are very concerned about how the system works in terms of contact tracing. You propose the green tag, which we have now on our mobile phone, and hope that could be the way. Tell me more about that.
All right. People are very creative. During the whole process of fighting against virus, we will use the internet to contact people, to release necessary information, and also to give pre-warnings of all the things should be warned to people. However, such kind of very important info based upon data is also a big concern of people, because people think about the protection of privacy of citizens. I think this is truly need to be raised. That's why during the previous 2 sessions, I personally proposed we need to speed up the amplification of the legal system for protection of data online. And this time, I proposed again in another way, because now we have a new term very well used in China we call new infrastructure constructions. Frankly, it's a kind of construction of infrastructure itself. However, at the same time, it's brand new. And that is why I proposed that we need to first work out the standards for such kinds of new construction of infrastructure. Secondly, to build up new legal framework to protect the privacy of citizens. And thirdly, those enterprises involving in the construction themselves should have a kind of decent ethics they need to follow as enterprises. Only with all joint efforts in those 3 ways, I think we can find the solutions.
Mr. Zhou, you talk about the legal framework.
Yes.
Now, how far are we from that legal framework? You talk about protecting people's rights. Well, and can make sure at a time of public health crisis we can use this tool well. So how far are we from that legal system?
So far as legal system is concerned, we started from almost nothing when the opening door policy adopted in 1978. Through the very, I will say, big efforts by the People's Congress and all related fields of people, the legal framework is there. And this time, the very big issue on the agenda for both People's Congress and CPPCC is the passing, of course, by the National People's Congress, the first civil code of China after the formation of the People's Republic. This civil code is the only piece of law in China up to today within the framework as a code. It's a code, meaning it should be covering all necessary areas possible. For instance, the protection of property, no matter it's real estate, it's mobiles or mobile properties or intellectual properties. The issues of wills, the issues of marriage, the issues of protection on the very basis of torts, so on and so forth. All those are legal terms, including the well protection of privacy, of those information used by internet. So my answer to your question is, first, the legal framework is there. Secondly, it needs very big amplification itself. Thirdly, we need something new. For instance, the personal information going through the internet is something to be protected. And up to today, there's a model law, model meaning the coverage, the degree of authority are all there. Is a law for the protection of private information passed by EU. I think EU, this very interesting and important piece of legislation could be not something we just take as granted, but we take seriously, and we will well use the legal doctrines there for a part of the thinking of a legislation.
As a result of the pandemic and also trade wars, we've seen the economy's future uncertain, even though we are very confident about the potential. Mr. Zhou, about that area, do you have some insights to share with us?
The pandemic is the most serious issue for human beings. Some people call it another kind of world war without visible enemies. I do agree. The pandemic will go on for a certain period of time. Days, weeks, months, or years. Frankly, no one knows. Of course, there are 5 types of technical approach to conduct research and the production of vaccines. Still, only with the human use could we understand and realize which one is truly valuable and useful. In that sense, we need to put the control of the expression of the virus together with the protection of the health of human beings into our mind as a long-term battle. It's a long-term battle. Then we need to very well try our best to reopen the society, not as status quo, but as a protected society. That's why in such a battlefield, we have 2 battles. The first period is we'll use all resources necessary to fight against the expression of the virus. And the second, we'll use all the means to reopen the market, to rejuvenate the economy. Only in that way, I will say, people can feel it's still a hope, and hope is still ahead of us.
You are watching World Insight. Coming up on our program, how is the Chinese economy weathering the pandemic storm? An investment mover and shaker with the facts right after the break.
It is a severe blow.
Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. China has pulled out all the stops to nurse the economy back to health and set its long-term direction. But one reality we have to face is the demand overseas remains extremely weak as the pandemic virtually hit the whole world. And domestic demand hasn't picked up the momentum yet. So what is the state of the Chinese economy? In the past decades, the country has robust year-on-year GDP growth. What do we make of this year's change? I ask all of these questions to Mr. Zhang Yichen, the founder and chairman and CEO of City Capital, the China International Trust Investment Corporation, for answers. Mr. Zhang, as an investor, how do you look at this both challenge and opportunity time for you? I mean, when it comes to rescue financing, emergency funds, and dealing with the debts those companies have and buying out.
It is a severe blow. We have many portfolio companies in China, and they are affected to varying degrees. Some of them, for example, like McDonald's, initially it went down as much as almost 50% in terms of sales in February. But it has been recovering very gradually, and initially, but later on very rapidly. At this point, we're over 95%, in terms of the sales relative to the last year, and that's tremendous recovery, and mainly due to the digital infrastructure in the country, as well as we put in, for example, delivery and contactless mobile order and contactless pickup together account for over 70% of the business. That has enabled the company, McDonald's, to recover so quickly. But on the other hand, we have other companies in tourism, offline education, and those companies are going through a very hard time. And we work with local governments. We work with the banks in terms of restructuring, and so far, obviously there were very hairy moments, but we are able to weather through it. And just based on my anecdotal experience, because the bankruptcy process in China is not as straightforward as in the U.S. or other developed countries, because it's a fairly drawn-out process. So when you indicate it that you may be going down, this is when the help will actually come in. So instead of a blanket sort of a relief effort, which the U.S. and Europe was doing, China can be more targeted and trying to help only the companies that's about to buckle under the pressure. So it's more precise in some ways.
Do you see that kind of precise structure in terms of rescuing and support to companies already being established?
I think every level of government is clearly tasked with, protecting employment, protecting jobs as the top priority. There's no doubt about that. So in some ways, China is a more of a top-down sort of a political structure. At this point, if you look at it, how China has weathered through this, pandemic economically, I would say the ordinary people, sort of took care of themselves in some ways because China has higher level of savings and China has a better family support system. That's the first level. And then the second level is the companies. Companies, I haven't really heard that many companies who are announcing openly and laying off people simply because the pressure from the government and the social pressure as well. So the the companies are really bearing a great burden and bearing the brunt of this impact. But if there are, I mean, there's only so much you can do if you got no money left and you have to close up. And that's when the government will coordinate the banks to come in to help. I've been through the process on one of our portfolio companies, and I've heard many other cases. So the rumor of a widespread unemployment is perhaps exaggerated because the pressure overall on the company and the help it's getting if it's in critical conditions are helping, sort of saving jobs.
Another thing you mentioned earlier, sir, which is about, some of the businesses you are running, including the food and beverage companies, suggesting that the new technologies are helping you to weather the storm right now. Now, would that give you a second thought as to where to invest for the future, and also how the existing companies are having to restructuring them in the near future?
Generally, I think China was able to weather through this pandemic, because of the effective control measures. But at the same time, when you control, people still need to live, and you need to be able to, to get food, to get basic services. And this is where the digital infrastructure came in. And luckily, China was, in the past 5 years, had a booming infrastructure in digital, business, and you have delivery everywhere. Everything is online, and I think that trend will continue. And just like in the U.S. and everywhere else, and this pandemic will force many businesses online, and China is well positioned for that. And you're going to see gains of online companies further, and that is a direction for our future investment, and many, helping many businesses moving not just from the 2C sector but to the 2B sector to have their business online in digital form, and and then building up the logistic infrastructure as well, and plus I think there is technology decoupling that's going on with the U.S. and which will help some of the Chinese players who could replace unreliable vendors from the U.S. and so these are the directions and focus for our investment.
Talking about the infrastructure investment, may I just follow up on one thing? According to the government work report, likely to be new infrastructure investment, which could include basic infrastructure investment together with integrated infrastructure investment and what they call innovative infrastructure investments. Now, these are abstract categories. Which specific category and which specific content could help you and your business as you just analyzed?
Well, as China further improves its digital infrastructure, which is all the things that you mentioned, the 5G, with more data centers and AI and Internet of Things, I think obviously all the entire digital infrastructure will be greatly improved, even better than now, and that will position China at the forefront of that, the sort of a revolution or movement ahead of all the other countries.
And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. You can also search us on Twitter and Facebook accounts. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of the team, thanks for watching.